When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite. Obey your thirst.
Hello and welcome to this joint podcast between the Aspects of Crime podcast and Spymasters. My name's Antonia Senior. I'm the host of Spymasters podcast, and every couple of weeks I interview all the best writers about espionage. In this particular episode of both Spymasters and Aspects of Crime, we are getting together, a few of us who love spy writing and love crime writing, are getting together to discuss our books of the year for 2025. So with me around the sofas are the brilliant Paul Burke, who is the editor of Aspects of Crime and in charge of the Aspects of Crime podcast. We've got Mark Ellis, the prolific and brilliant author, the writer of the Frank Merlin series, the most recent of which is Death of an Officer, which we, both Paul and I, loved. And we've got Thomas Waugh, the spy writer, whose most recent book was Endgame. And we are going to talk about all our favourite books of the year, starting, I think, we've got three each. We've got a few to get to. I think we're going to start with Paul Burke. So I should just say, for the benefit of anybody listening, we also have a very rambunctious puppy called Marshall. So if you can hear, pattering and shouting, that's about the puppy, not about Paul. He's not suddenly rampaging across London.
Although, who knows, before the end of the episode.
Yeah, let's see how we get on. So, Paul, your first book.
All right, first book, it's a crime book, but it does have sort of spy aspects. It's set during the Second World War. And it's called The Darkest Winter by Carlo Lucarelli. So it's an Italian book in translation. And it's about a character called De Luca, who's a detective during the Second World War. This is the time when Mussolini's fallen. So the north of Italy is now under invasion from the Allies, and at the same time, the Germans and the Italians, the black shirts, are fighting over who's got control of the area. So we're in the city of Bologna, and De Luca's is an ordinary detective to start with, but he winds up in the political police because everybody does. And he winds up with three cases to handle. One is a dead German soldier. Another is, it appears to be crime of passion. And a third one is a worker. And he's got to deal with these three murders for three different masters. The Germans want to know who killed their soldier. Town Hall want to know what happened to the doctor, the crime of passion part of the story. And the third part of the story, the resistance want him to work for. So he's actually wound up working for all three masters. And I suppose the essence of it is that a character like De Luca is not a good man, but it's how does a person, deal with being stuck between the German forces, the even worse Italian fascists, and the resistance, and come through the war with some kind of humanity left at the end of it.
That's a really interesting premise. There's a few books I've read like that recently. The kind of notion of a kind of reasonably good guy trying to live his life in horrible times. I mean, Mark, this is something you must be quite interested in. This is your kind of area, isn't it, Mark, as well?
Yes, I mean, people living through the very great difficulties of war and all the terrible things that happen. So, I have not read this book, but I think, sounds like a good one.
It is fascinating. I talked to the author, and one of the interesting things is what makes us think somebody's a good character or a good person. In essence, this guy is a good character only in the sense that he's better than the people around him. In other words, the Nazis and the Italian fascists. And the author, I talked to him at Lucarelli, and what he said was, I don't like De Luca. But we do as readers get to like him because we concentrate on that little positive about him rather than all the other things about him, because he's still involved in what's going on during the war. And that's a fascinating thing, how we do adapt to that. So we like a character, we take a character to heart.
That's an interesting subject, though, the question of if you're writing a book about a principal character and you don't like him. I'm afraid I like my character, and I'm not quite sure if I could actually write the books without liking him. Of course, there are lots of other characters I don't like who are in the book too.
I mean, it's a kind of Bernie Gunter thing where, he's living in extreme times of unpleasant background. And he, again, is this sort of, unpleasant character sometimes. But I think if you're humorous, and still unpleasant, I think you'll capture the reader's sympathy. I mean, I'm not sure, is DeLuca funny?
Yeah, there is a lot of humour in the books, and I think that comes from in the darkest moments. We always find humour, don't we? There's always something about it. And it's not that he's an unlikable character in personality, but it's what he does. It's what you know he's part of. You know, it's that nobody comes out of the war clean. You're right about Bernie Gunther or Volker Kircher's character in Babylon Berlin. You know, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's of course where the fascination is. It's that tension, isn't it?
Bernie Gunther gets compromised by the many things he has to encounter after the war, particularly, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, it sounds like a brilliant one. Good one to start with. Nice to start with something chewy, complicated, and morally difficult right at the beginning. Talking of chewy, complicated, morally difficult people, Thomas Waugh, tell us your first book.
Well, for those of you in the know, we're sort of dovetailing a bit now with Bernie Gunther, and my first book is by Jane Finn, a sequel to her book last year, which we spoke about. But this book is Appointment in Paris. It's another Stella Fry, Harry Fox book, and it's sort of the same again, really. It's a equal as well as a sequel, but we're back in World War II, and this is both a crime and a spy book. It's kind of, there's a nice murder at the beginning. I say a nice murder because a German dies. It's at Trent Park, and a fair amount of you may know about Trent Park. This is where the kind of German prisoners of war were housed, and they were bugged to the eyeballs, and their sort of secrets are revealed. If any of you have read the first book, you'll love this second book, but this kind of sequel, Appointment in Paris, which actually spends a bit of time. There is a jaunt to Paris. People will enjoy this. I mean, Jane is brilliant. I mean, we all know her, actually. And she is wonderfully smart and fun. And the book is kind of wonderfully smart and fun. She's very good on historical detail where, in terms of just sort of self-selection, she doesn't lay it on with a trowel. But it's all sort of like quite poignant and interesting, you know, just in terms of the sort of shows that were on in the time and the clothes. It's kind of just excellent writing. It's she's getting her own sort of formula, and it's working.
I agree. Her detail is fantastic. So she has, for example, Noel Coward working in Paris, well, basically before the invasion of France. And I appreciated that because I've got Noel Coward in one of my books too, but a bit later on in the war.
I agree as well. I think one of the things that historical writers do badly is doing loads of research and then shoehorning it in a way that makes you feel like they're kind of bashing you over the head with it so that you know they did the work. And Jane does the opposite of that. It's all very lightly done. It's all very perfectly done. And what she does is create an atmosphere of a time and place that I think very few people writing today can match, actually. I think she's brilliant at it.
I think one of the really interesting things as well is this time she's gone for the home front. And it's the first time she's done that, hasn't it? Because her other books are set across Europe and they're outside. Whereas now she's stepping into your territory, Mark.
Yeah, stepping into your territory, Mark.
Kicking you out.
Keep out, Jane.
Okay, Mark, on that note, I think it's your turn.
My first book is by Alex Gerlis, who's an ex-BBC man, and he's very well known in the spy novelist trade. I think he's actually one of the best people practicing in that area at the moment. This book is called The Second Traitor. It's the second in the series, which he's now calling the Double Agent series. I didn't read the first, but it had no negative effect on me. We're in September 1940. There's much talk of Hitler planning an invasion, and he was planning an invasion, which was called Operation Sea Lion. And the protagonist, who's called Charles Cooper, is assigned to a Whitehall committee called the Invasion Warning Subcommittee, and they're meant to be planning for whatever might happen. There's also in this story a shadowy organization called the Group, which is made up of British and Irish Nazi collaborators. There's also a Soviet double agent rattling around in the British security services. So it's a good mix of stuff, and he puts it together brilliantly. The story is very complex. I like complex stories. I'm always accused of writing over-complex stories, and he is too. So we're friends about that. Story action takes place in Britain, goes to Germany, goes to Rotterdam. I didn't actually know this, but in anticipation of the invasion, the Nazis went round Europe collecting all the barges that they could, and they collected them in Rotterdam preparatory to the crossing the Channel. Of course, we all know this didn't happen, but Charles Cooper gets to the bottom of things. Some points are left open, but I really loved it. I zipped through it. And as I say, I think he's one of the best people operating in this area
It
now.
seems that he's making fewer things up than the BBC newsroom.
But back to the book. I think I really enjoyed this too. And I think he's managed to... The thing about this is that the series, which is 4 books, I think, when it's complete, actually has this spy who's hidden in the background. And he's managing that brilliantly. Yeah. Because you, as a reader, you have to know more than the characters in the book actually know. But at the same time, there's no point in telling us who it is at the start. Otherwise, we get bored with it. Yeah. So it's really nice to be able to have this story where he's kept that going. And I think he's done that expertly. And I'm in favour of spy books, by the way, that are complex. I know people talk about depth of character and so on, but for me, I think complexity is an absolute essential for a good book.
Well, as I say, he leaves some things open. So he's setting up the next book. I do plan to read the first book when I get a chance. Like everyone here, I've had a heavy reading year. So I'm looking forward to reading some stuff that I really want to read. So that's what's on my list.
I agree with everything you guys said. I think it's a wonderful book. And I also think Paul's right that the cleverness of having a kind of 4-book sequence with one kind of backstory run. It's the kind of thing that you would get in TV, I guess. I can't think of many book series, spy series that attempt to do the same thing, as have one kind of underlying story that isn't resolved at the end of each book.
I think this is his 13th book.
So he knows what he's doing, is the bottom line.
I mean, there is an elephant in the room where all the books we've chosen so far are kind of, a lot of historical World War II espionage, smart, slick, well-researched, yeah.
Yeah, okay, well, I'm going to break the mold. I'm going to go modern. I'm going to go hardcore. I'm going to go China. So it's
the new evil empire.
I didn't say that.
I'll say that again. It's the new evil empire.
If our Chinese overlords are listening, that was that was Thomas More talking, not me.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's the international man of mystery. So the
I've got no social credit.
You've got no social credits. That's actually a true story. So the book, it's The Peak by Sam Guthrie. It's a debut novel. It's a split timeline novel. So the contemporary element is that a political kind of Australian fixer, I guess, of an Alistair Campbell mould in Australia, his political boss, who is also his old friend from school, dramatically and catastrophically commits suicide in the opening few pages of the novel. It's incredibly well written. And then it bounces between now and the handover of Hong Kong to the Chinese when the 2 main characters were young men. There's Chinese espionage in there. It's really about a subject which I find utterly and endlessly fascinating, which is the point where politics, espionage and business meet when we're talking about the new world of Chinese spying. And the distinctions we once thought were the case in the Cold War, where it's state spying on state, are no longer how things operate. It's companies, it's, ordinary people involved in espionage in extraordinary ways. It's, industrial espionage and state espionage being basically the same thing. And Sam Guthrie, who wrote the book, knows all about this because this has been his career, basically, is managing that. The other main difference between now and the Cold War is that we weren't economically dependent on the Soviets when we were conducting spy wars against them. We're now, constantly had this tension between our national security interests and our economic interests. So all of this is in the book, and it's a cracking thriller, and it's brilliantly written, and the characters are fantastic. So as a debut, I think it's definitely my debut of the year, spy debut of the year, without a doubt. Yeah, and I talked to him on the podcast. In fact, the books I'm recommending, I've mainly talked to these guys on the podcast, and they're brilliant. And Sam Guthrie, I urge you to go and search that episode because it's one of my favourite conversations of the year as well. It was fascinating.
Well, we were talking a little bit about this last night, and one of the sort of questions posed is that, in a sense, the Chinese are the new Soviets, but what's the difference? Is that the Chinese have got a lot more money, so there is this economic dependence that, in a sense, there's a tension. It's, say with the embassy, for instance, why you would allow that at all, but it's to do with, it's the economy, stupid.
So Sam Guthrie, his background is?
So he's done lots of things, but he was a diplomat, a government official. He's a trade kind of guy. He's a fixer kind of guy. So he was saying, it has been in his life his job to take parties of politicians or businessmen to China and environs around, and kind of when they are suspiciously approached by beautiful young women, point out gently that maybe the beautiful young women have an agenda. Yeah, so he's been at the kind of professionally at the interface of this. What I thought was brilliant is quite often I've read books by people who are professionally involved in worlds relating to espionage, who know a lot but aren't really particularly good writers. But Sam is a fantastic writer and knows his stuff, so it makes for an amazing book about something that really, really matters. And as Thomas Waugh was just saying, the economic question is so different. I mean, can you imagine a scenario where we were like saying to the Russians, go ahead, buy most of our infrastructure, please have massive stakes in all of our countries. Why don't you own the companies that own all our digital networks and our nuclear power stations? So if this Cold War ever turns hot, you can just turn all the lights off. And this is one of the things that this book explores so brilliantly.
Yeah, I think we're going to get much more commercial fiction or spy fiction around the commercial issues in the future. This is imperialism. This is Chinese imperialism. This is the way you do it. You don't actually walk in all over the world and take over with armies. You take over by buying everything.
Yeah.
You take over the institutions. It's exactly what we did.
And it worked then.
Except we just seem to be happily accepting it happening again now.
Yeah, exactly. This time we're the oppressed colonists.
We're the colony. Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, on which note, Paul?
Back to me.
Back to you. Have you got anything more? Yeah, just
no, this is not exactly a happy story. And it takes us back a few hundred years, actually. Peter Tonkin, it was the book before this that I read, actually, that I'd never read any Peter Tonkin before, and I was absolutely knocked out by how good he is as a writer. And this is The Shadow of a Queen. And his books, there's 5 in the series. I think there'll be 6 by the time the series is finished. It sort of ranges this character called Robert Poley, who's a spy for Walsingham, and we're talking about the reign of Elizabeth I. So it covers his whole story, and at times he picks on an individual story in the middle of that period, so one spy incident. And at other times, like this book, what he's done is actually range across the whole period. So it starts as far back as 1572 when Robert Poley actually saves Walsingham from the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in Paris, which is an incident in which thousands of Protestants are murdered by Catholics, led by Anjou. And that is what set... We talked about... If you talk about somebody like Walsingham and you think about Walsingham and say, like, in a way you could see him as a bad guy, he was plotting against Queen Mary and so on. But this is his sort of origin story, if you like. So it takes us back to that. Now, the essence of the book is about Mary, Queen of Scots, and the story around how she gets caught up in the Babington plot and so on. But he takes it from this point where he starts explaining about her and her living in France early on when she was married, and her husband dies as a teenager, and then she goes back to Scotland before this coming back to England. So it builds this story. And what I like about this kind of book is that the complexity of the period is covered. So you've got the relationship between the Protestants and the Catholics. You've got problems within the Protestant religion itself and the different sects. You've then got Britain and France, or England and France and Spain. And at the same time, you've got the Pope, because the Pope is not only a religious power, he's also a secular power. And he manages to cover all this complexity and get this story together. And in essence, of course, we all know what happened. We all know what happened to Mary's Queen of Scots. And yet this is still a really exciting spy story. And he's taken this character, Robert Poley, who's a real person, and given him this, he's added a lot to his life, which he would declare at the end of the book. He doesn't leave it, where it's fiction, he'll tell you that. But I think he's an absolutely fascinating writer. I love it, and I learned so much as well.
I haven't read this particular book, but I've read a couple before, and I agree. I think he's a terrific writer. But of course, the Tudor age, the Tudor family, they're a family who never stopped giving. A certain person around this table once told me, write a book about the Tudor age, and you can't fail to have a bestseller. Isn't that right?
I'm not sure if that was me, but what I would say about the Tudors is one of those things is basically men and women will buy it of various ages. And, that's why it's a kind of enduring appeal. I mean, you can say that it's on the school syllabus, etc., but I don't think that's it. It's just It's endlessly fascinating. It's about family. It's about power politics. I mean, what Peter does, which a lot of good authors do, it's about knowing the period, but knowing what to leave out and what to put in, what's fundamentally interesting. And he knows what he's doing on that front. He blurs the line between what's crime fiction and what's espionage as well. He's very comfortable in both camps. And the series keeps building, yeah. And again, you're right about, the idea that we all know what the end of Mary, Queen of Scots is, but if the book's good enough, you've still got jeopardy, which is a pretty neat trick, really. So God bless him and his sales.
So that's Peter Tonkin. Brilliant. Thomas Waugh, what's your next one?
So my next book is also a sequel, and it's a sequel to what was the Spymasters book of the year. But this book is William Boyd's The Predicament, and William Boyd is having fun again, writing a kind of pacey, slightly humorous take on a kind of reluctant spy, although sometimes he's not that reluctant because he's fighting off boredom in his life. I mean, he's also very good where the main character is a kind of, a travel writer. So there's quite a lot of in-jokes in terms of sort of publishing and writing as well. And it's set during the kind of early 60s and the kind of the culmination of Kennedy speaking in Berlin. And he kind of romps through certain events. He's technically a kind of playing a triple agent, I guess. And we just follow this guy around, and this guy is, we have sympathy for him. He's smart. There's kind of, a sense of intrigue. There's a love interest. And it's kind of, it's William Boyd enjoying himself. And he deserves to. He's one of our kind of finest writers as well. And there's always been a kind of sense of humour there, but there's probably more of a sense of fun with this series that he's writing as well. He's kind of kicking off his slippers and enjoying himself. It's almost a third act in his writing. And I think the series is done well, I believe. And, I dare say it might make a TV series and film series. I don't know. But you'll enjoy it is the nub of it.
It's quite an interesting thing, isn't it? That the way publishing works is that books are sort of siloed into genres, and nowadays you're kind of either spy or you're romance or you're whatever. And William Boyd's traditionally been seen as a literary property. So his spy books, which are excellent, I'm not having a go at all, but his spy books are treated as some sort of more literary quality than the spy books of people who are writing really fantastic books, but they don't have that sort of, aura, that patina of kind of, I'm a literary superstar, like descending into your genre for a while. I don't know. That's slightly, I feel a bit uneasy about all of that, I guess.
Yeah, I do see what you're saying, but I think actually William Boyd, because I think if you take William Boyd's literary novels, it doesn't matter which one you read, they're all written the same way. The same enjoyment and the same creation of characters. So I think that there's a snobbishness around it sometimes that you literally can't be genre. I don't see much difference between William Boyd's writing when he's writing thrillers and when he's writing other books. I just think he's great at creating character, and he's very good at getting period too, isn't he?
I think with these books, he has crossed the floor. There's a lot. I mean, this is William Boyd writing his pulp fiction in a sense. It is very commercial. He's basically, it's why shouldn't he, kind of writes. It is a fair bit more commercial. I mean, it's classy, or we consider it classy because it's William Boyd, but your point stands. Yeah. But I do think with these William Boyd novels, he is leaning into, in a sense, more genre fiction, if you like. And genre fiction's fine.
He's actually one of my favourite writers, has been for a long time. And clearly this is not like the New Confessions or anything like that, which is on a different level. Maybe I'm being snobbish about it.
It's a truly remarkable book.
But that is one of the great books. And if he's having fun with these books, that's great. I haven't read this one in particular, but I've read the previous one, Gabriel's Moon. Yes, I thoroughly enjoyed it. But, it's not the New Confessions. So what? Just enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I would say, though, that he always writes literary novels with the same thing in mind, to entertain. And sometimes people don't set out to entertain when they write literary fiction.
That's true. I was talking to a young aspiring novelist this morning who told me she wanted to write literary fiction. And I said, please, please, please have a plot.
Or marry well.
Yeah, or marry well. I also said that. I did. I was like, you're never going to make any money. What's your main, that can be your side hustle. But if you're going to write literary fiction, please have a plot. Because the best literary novelists learn something from genre novelists, actually, rather than the other way around. Because the best literary novelists, the ones whose books outlive a generation and carry on, are obviously have all the hallmarks of literary fiction, i.e. brilliantly written and very layered and very nuanced and very complicated and blah, blah, blah. But they also have plots. I don't know. Maybe it's a hobby horse of mine.
No, I think you're absolutely right. The one thing about spy fiction is when we're talking about complications, it's the nuance and everything that's in there. But look at how many times literary fiction resorts to something to do with murder or something to do with the kind of conflict that occupies our genre writing, because that's where you see people at their most extreme. That's when you really find out about people. And that's why literary fiction resorts to it just the same.
Crime and Punishment.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, yeah, well, there's a whole... We could take up several hours if we listed all of them. And by the same token, you've got some other books which start out perhaps not as literary fiction, like Wilkie Collins or something. He was setting out to write that, but it is literary fiction.
That's true. Yeah. Anyway, so we should maybe have a Spymasters Aspects of Crime manifesto. No snobbery about genre. It's all good. All books that get people reading are good things and have a plot. Yeah, we love plots. Mark, has your next book got a plot?
Yes, and another fiendishly complex one, so I love it. So this is Smoke and Embers by John Lawton, who is a brilliant writer who I'm privileged to know. In fact, we had a book launch once in New York and had a very good time doing it. It wasn't this book. It was like 3 or 4 books below.
This is corruption at the lowest level.
So Smoke and Embers is an Inspector Troy book. His most famous series is based around Inspector Frederick Troy, who we first meet in the first book. He's a detective in World War II London, familiar ground. He's a rather an interesting background, and in that his father is a Russian emigre press magnate, and therefore he comes from, he's an upper-class immigrant, except he's not an immigrant. He's the only one of the children who was actually born in England. And anyway, he has lots of adventures. As I say, there are 10 books. Some of them are set in the war, some of them are after the war, and some of them move around between different periods. This particular book is one of those that moves around between different periods. So when we kick off, we're in 1950, and Inspector Troy is investigating the activities of a Rachman-like racketeer who, amongst other things, has shabby flats in Notting Hill, but has got his finger in a lot of other pies. And then it develops into a much broader war-encompassing, spy-encompassing, crime-encompassing story. And it goes back to Auschwitz. One of the characters is in Auschwitz. And it basically picks 3 people and follows their lives as they intertwine. And one of them is an Auschwitz prisoner. Another is a Jewish man from a Jewish family in the UK. And then there are Americans. There are actually more than 3. There are quite a lot of people. And it is fiendishly complex. You jump back and forth. And he manages it absolutely brilliantly. And I could not recommend it more. It's a great, great book.
Yeah, I've read this and I enjoyed it too very much. A couple of things interest me about this. One is the idea of what fiction can actually add to our knowledge of history. Because I think, and I wonder what you think about this, Mark, that books that run in long series like the Troy series and cover that period are actually almost a chronicle of the times too, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think John Lawton tends to sort of slab off the idea that he does huge amounts of research, but he does huge amounts of research. And he's got, the various locations. He's got Auschwitz. He's then got the invasion of Berlin. One of the characters goes all the way into Berlin. There's another Russian spy. And then there is what goes on in England, which is that one of these people, and I'm not going to say who because it's actually a question mark, which of the people who's wandering around in wartime Europe ends up. There's a question of different people exchange identities and so on. But there's a very interesting portrayal of immediately post-war criminal life in London. Again, something that appeals to me a great deal. It's one of those books that stays with you quite a long time after you've finished it.
Just to Paul's point about what fiction can bring to history, this is something I'm really, really interested in because I now write nonfiction and I have written historical fiction. And I think one of the main things is that when you're writing history, you kind of go back and you're looking for patterns and you're looking for explanations. When you're living in history, it's quite confused, it's quite chaotic. You're living in a kind of immediate present, and you're making decisions and making choices based on the chaos, not based on the hindsight. And it's a very simple thing to say, but I think it's not always a simple thing to kind of really consider. And it's something that historians miss. And I think having written fiction really helps me write non-fiction precisely because of that, because it's always in my mind that the people making these decisions that you're critiquing as a historian had no idea what was going to happen. They didn't, and they were making the decision based on false premises and incomplete information. And I just think it's a really, really fascinating thing that fiction writers can do, which is to propel you into that historical present.
But I'm going to be a snob for once and say that I think this is part of the brief of a historical novelist, if you like, is to direct people towards the real history and good history books, if you like, and or historians. I think it's a gateway drug rather than the end heroin.
Well, insofar as one reveals the true history, is that what you mean?
As much as I enjoy historical fiction, I do think that good history done well is the better narrative and, I don't know, meat on the bone of history.
Okay, well, as the author of my first non-fiction book this year called Boom Time, about World War II time in London, available now on the internet and in print.
But were you wearing a different hat?
I was wearing a different hat, but actually I was just regurgitating the history I'd learnt when researching my Frank Merlin series. So it's all interlinked. Yes.
Yeah. I think you're right, Richard, in the sense that, we want people to read the proper history. But you have to get people there, and sometimes you need to take them by the hand. And
well, that's what I mean. I think it's as I say, a sort of gateway drug.
Yeah, it was my gateway drug. I mean, when I was little, all I read was bloody Bernard Cornwell and Jean Plaidy, and now look at me. I don't know what they want. Now look, I don't know.
Having dinner with Bernard Cornwell.
I don't know if it's. Is it okay to admit that I actually loved Jean Plaidy? I was reading them when I was 10 or 11. All those many, many years ago. But every time I write one of my historical fiction books, I learn fascinating new things about history which I didn't know. And then I regurgitate them in my plots. But it's a great learning experience writing historical fiction.
I want to be clear. I would never suggest that anybody gets their history from historical fiction. So that's clear. But I think it sometimes can add nuance. And it can, as you say, Antonia, get this way where you can actually look at a period and start to make sense. You can pattern it in a way that the chaos is just what exists. The other thing is that it does give you a chance. And this is where you have to assume that it's a personal history to the writer. It's not fact. But then in all honesty, I don't think history is fact either. I think you could go into, I know that's a whole argument we could get into, but it's the idea of interiors where you can actually take a character. You can take what you know about a character, as for instance, the Thomas Cromwell novels, where
Hilary Mantel
does immaculate research, finds out all the factual things she can, never contradicts the facts if she can help it, but at the same time has given interior to a character so that we can understand Thomas Cromwell. Now, I don't for 1 minute think that's the real Thomas Cromwell, but in all honesty, I don't think any history book would give you the absolute real Thomas Cromwell either. So for me, it's a sort of an addition. I agree. It's a gateway too. Yeah, for sure.
It is a gateway, but quite often you do then end up in a situation where most people who know anything about Thomas Cromwell know Hilary Mantel's Thomas Cromwell. And I've read a couple of histories of Thomas Cromwell that make it quite clear that Thomas Cromwell is quite generous to the real Thomas Cromwell. And does that matter? No, because that's, that's not on her. It's on you, I guess, as a reader, if you take hers as definitive when she's explicitly writing a fictional character. So no, interesting stuff.
Yeah, but there are two different types of history. I mean, there's the history like there was a Battle of Hastings on this particular day in 1066. And then there's the question of, was Thomas Cromwell a good man or a bad man? And that's interpretative history.
No, novels can kind of fill in the gap, but I do think that if you read a good historical novel, you can and should be led to read a good history book about it. But I'm not sure if the door should, does, can, will swing in the same way where you read a good biography of, I don't know, let's say Nelson, then you want to read lots of fiction about Nelson.
Well, speaking of Hilary Mantel, one of my absolute favourite books is the one that taught me all about the French Revolution. I did it, which is in a Place of Greater Safety, which I think is a fantastic book. And then I've read, histories by various eminent people, and I still don't think that they gave me the flavour of the French Revolution as much as that book.
Giving the flavour of something is the job of the novelist, isn't it? Whether we're talking about history or a particular world. I mean, it's that sense of authenticity. And even though they're faking it, because it can never be truly authentic, nothing can ever be truly authentic. The author's first job is to make the reader feel as if they're living in an authentically...
Oh, Hilton stay, your beds are soft and cozy. No lumpy couch, no stiff futon, no shower line at crack of dawn. Oh, Hilton stay.
When you want holiday comfort you can count on, it matters where you stay. Enjoy comfortable rooms and friendly service when you stay with Hilton instead. Save up to 25% this season when you book with Hilton. Hilton for the stay. Terms apply.
Realised universe. Anyway, we should move on. So my second book is Paul Vidich, the great American spy writer, and his latest one, The Poet's Game. Again, I had him on the show on Spymasters, and he was absolutely fascinating. This is a book about an ex-CIA officer, and he left the agency after the tragic and horrific death of his wife and child. And he went off and he made lots of money as a fund manager and is still kind of moonlighting a bit for the agency. And then he's called in by his old boss and asked for a favour to go back to Russia and kind of, hook up with one of his former agents that he ran. And doing that unravels the whole history of what he thought his life had been about. And it does the kind of thing that you really want from a spy novel. It's not like the ones you've been talking about. It's not insanely complicated. It's not like William Boyd. It's not great literary work. What it is an absolutely cracking, twisty-turny spy thriller that you will be reading at 2:00 in the morning, not wanting it to stop. And I think sometimes that's exactly what is called for, especially in a dreich winter. So... yeah, you've read it, have you, Paul?
I have read it, yeah, and I agree with you entirely. I think one of the nice things about reading an author that you catch early, because I caught Paul Vidich with his first novel, and it's that he's been getting better and better. And what he does is he focuses on character. It's interesting when you said that about plot, because I do talk about complicated plot quite a lot. But actually, this is a reasonably straightforward plot, and it is driven by character. And it's a thoroughly engaging story. It's one that gets gripping very quickly.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I mean, it is interesting. With this is ostensibly a crime and spy fiction podcast, but we're all kind of drawn to, in a sense, I mean, I think that spy fiction is just that little bit, often, not entirely, classier literary subgenre of crime fiction.
I think maybe I would argue it's because of who the influences are. So when I have people on Spymasters podcast and I was like, who are your literary influences? Every single one says John le Carré without exception. And then they'll name other people as well. I don't know. If you ask crime writers the same thing, who would they say? Probably, fantastic writers, but it would be possibly the great stars of kind of the first period of who are plot driven, and so the spy stuff, in my opinion, because of the kind of the influences on the people that are writing it, tends to be a bit more morally murky, a bit more chewy, a bit more character-ish, a bit more le Carré-ish. Whereas a lot of the crime stuff, even the darker crime, is a lot more kind of, you're being driven towards a whodunit ending, basically.
Yeah, I suppose it's trapped almost by that need to do that, isn't it? With the crime field, what you tend to find is that people are either Agatha Christie or they're Sherlock Holmes in their beginnings. And then after that, they're sort of either golden age or they're hard-boiled. And it falls into those sort of categories. And I think a lot of what goes on, the moral ambiguity of hard-boiled and noir, is what follows into spy fiction when we start getting to the 60s and you get John le Carré. And, of course, the other one that people mention all the time now is Mick Herron. You know,
the strange, the general point you're making, when I'm asked for my favourite influence, I always give Georges Simenon and Maigret, and actually the plot is not actually often very good in Maigret. It's just the whole atmosphere and the character and the style of it that's so effective, in my humble view. Having said that, I'm not trying to say that I don't try and do very good plots, but he's a great influence, I think. And of course, he is like after Agatha Christie, I think, isn't he the best-selling crime author ever? Or maybe
in French.
In French, yes. Obviously, I read it in the original, personally. No, I don't. I'm joking.
One elephant in the room in terms of perhaps dealing with genre fiction, literary fiction, is Graham Greene, who did straddle both as well. I mean, his entertainments were deliberately kind of genre fiction, but actually it's the Quiet American is a fine, I don't know whether we call it a spy novel, but it certainly influences spy fiction.
It's a spy novel. It's in my book on spy fiction.
But that's what defines it.
I do. Absolutely is from now on.
Brilliant.
No, I think that's very true.
So is Ministry of Fear a spy novel or not?
I would say yes.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. But I mean, my definition, I think, would probably run wider than most people's. I mean, I consider spy novels to be novels where the state picks on its own people. So not whether the Russians and the British are spying on each other, but what the Russians do to their own people. For me, that creates a spy story if it involves spies. So I have a slightly wider definition there maybe than most people.
I can't let the moment pass without saying that Graham Greene wrote the script and then the short novella to what is undoubtedly the greatest film of all time, which is called The Third Man.
I thought.
And that's really not a spy novel, is it? That's a crime.
I don't know. You see,
it does.
It does have the atmosphere. Do I include it? Yeah, absolutely, I do. Is it directly a spy novel? No. But then again, we're back to this thing you mentioned there about Graham Greene's entertainments, and that's what they were called. I read all Graham Greene's novels, or as many, God knows how many I have read over the years. And I like the literary ones, and I like the entertainments.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't like it when people say the entertainments are sort of lesser novels, because Heart of the Matter, is a great novel, and whatever way you want to look at it.
I think
deal with personal issues.
Also, the ones that are set in World War II. I mean, I always use books written in World War II, novels, because I always think that's really a great source of information, again, for atmosphere.
Listen, lads, sadly, Graham Greene's dead, so he's not in our 2025 roundup. So we're going to move on to someone who is Thomas Waugh. We've mentioned him, Mick Herron.
Well, this is my last novel. Yeah, I didn't want to, in a sense, it would be almost a hole in the podcast if we didn't mention Mick Herron. So, I mean, his latest book, Clown Town. Now, I think I said on a previous podcast that I've sort of kicked the dust from my feet with Mick Herron, where the series was getting maybe a little bit tired or predictable to me. But I saw the latest TV series, and I think Gary Oldman as saving the books and the TV series, if you like. And I have sort of, started the latest novel, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's an avid Mick Herron fan, and this is a novel where I suspect the first 5 Mick Herron novels he wrote without thinking that this is definitely going to be a TV, series. But reading this novel, I think we're in an era where Mick Herron knows that it's going to be a TV series, but it's not a lesser novel for it. It's basically, I think, got more pace. It's maybe got less internal monologues from the characters, which is a mix of a sort of good or bad thing. But at the end of the day, I'm kind of enjoying this novel as much as I sort of enjoyed the sort of really early ones where it wasn't sort of, I don't know, it was a bit newer and fresher to me. But I partly picked it just to kind of gauge what everyone else thinks.
Back to form then. I mean, we've talked a lot today about plot versus character versus whatever. I mean, these are character-led books. I mean, sometimes the plots are actually a bit rubbish, I would argue.
Light.
God, that was strong.
Light.
That was strong. Sorry, Mick.
The plots are a little light.
Yeah, the plots are, but the characters are so good and the setting is so good that you forgive him that. Paul, I mean, you've read them all.
Yeah, I think it's the office politics dialed up to 11. And by that, I mean the internal struggles, that happen within the organization rather than the stuff that's outside. We have an enemy, of course. We have issues going on, cases going on at the same time. But it's that he does the office politics, the stuff about people in relationships and working together better than anybody does. And he's built on what Le Carré did to deliver that. And I think you're right about the TV series. I think he is playing with the novels and the TV series as they've gone along. And I think he's enjoying having fun. But then given that these are such fun novels in the first place, I think it works. He's clever enough to make that work, and it does work. It's enjoyable. It's another aspect to, at times, they're very funny stories, aren't they? And you've got amazingly created, grotesque characters.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm a victim of the fact that there is a TV series, because I read the first two. I think the first 2 or 3, then I think around about then the TV series started, and I just kept on watching the TV series. Although I have bought this latest one because I was just wondering how the books were doing. I'm not going to go back and read the other ones, but they're
no. This is, as much as I'm enjoying this, I'm not. I think I missed out 2, maybe 5 or 6. I'm sure
they're very. Yeah, what can you say? They're the most popular books around at the moment, and the TV series is the most popular TV series. When I went to Nashville BoucherCon, the book event last year, he was there, and he had a sort of crowd of people following him everywhere. And I should mention, by the way, I think he's extremely modest and a retiring sort of guy. So I don't think his head was turned by it.
I think it's really interesting that what you were saying there, Mark, about sort of slightly abandoning the books for the TV. Like I've watched a bit of the TV series. I'm not a big TV person, and I'm not a big film person. And it's great.
I can concur where we talk about this stuff, and then Antonia goes to the toilet, looks at the menu, just even takes up smoking.
I know, yeah. If they start talking about films, I have to leave the table. But I tried watching it, and the TV series is really good, and Gary Oldman's really great. But it's not a patch on the books. You just miss so much. Like, Roddy Ho is one of the best characters in the whole universe. And in the TV series, he's like a tiny little bit part. I mean, he's really good.
The last series, he is given a little bit more expanded. I mean, he is comic relief. But again, I think that in the latest book, he's giving a bit more of a sort of stage as well.
He's the funniest character. Him and Lamb.
Yeah.
Sorry, Thomas War literally models his life on Jackson Lamb.
I model my diet.
What about the guy
Jackson
who
Lamb.
doesn't say anything? He's quite good too. What's his name? I never know what his name is. The guy with the hoodie.
Oh, Mark, he died.
I'm not a very pleasant person.
The next thing he's going to say is that there's no Father Christmas, isn't it? It's that time of year.
Well, look, okay, I will give the new one a go. I do love his characters. I've loved most of his books. Like you, I was feeling a bit potentially wearied. They felt a bit samey. But I'm going to go back to River and the rest of them. Don't tell me River Cartwright. Don't say anything. Shush. Don't speak.
The guy who plays River Cartwright is going to play Bernie Gunter.
He's also,
yeah, we can say that. Jack Lawton.
It's been in the newspaper.
And he's
Jack
also
Lawton.
playing Mr. Darcy in the new Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, he's doing well.
So I'm not sure how I feel about that.
No.
Okay, so why are they bothering with a new Pride and Prejudice, for God's sake?
Oh, because you can never get enough fun. Jesus Christ, Mark. Okay, that's a conversation for another podcast.
Period dramas are part of the BBC's raison d'etre.
Yeah. Paul, I missed you out in my hurry to get to Mick Herron. Tell me about your third book.
I can stop seething now then. Okay, so I thought actually to go for a factual book this time, and it's one I've just read, The Revolutionist by Jason Burke, who's the international security correspondent for The Guardian. And he's dealt with security issues across the world over a number of years. And there's a couple of things, I suppose. Why was I interested in this in the first place? If you don't mind, I'll tell you. There's two things that stuck out for me. I wasn't there in 1970, which is when this book starts, but there were 40 plus plane hijacks in 1970. And that's where the book starts. But what I do remember is comedy shows later in the 70s doing the Take Me to Cuba joke. And I didn't know why as a child that was funny. But the point is it was building on this idea that people did hijack planes and say, take me to Cuba. And that's where it all started. The other thing is it always struck me that the German police force developed in the 1970s, even computerization, in response to Baader-Meinhof. not in response to an increasing crime, but in response to a really small group of people with extremist views. And so this is the story of those European factions. It's the story of the rise of Islamist extremists, and the stuff that was going on with Palestine in the 1970s, the links between South America and the revolutionaries there, and again, what was going on in Palestine and how these organizations all linked up. And it tells the story, and this is one of the things you were saying earlier, Antonia, about the complications of a period. It just all happened around us when we were there. He's put this picture together that helps you to understand the sort of connections and the things that were going on. And it goes across this decade. And so it explains how people got to this point in the 1970s. And then it goes on from there to talk about how we are where we are now in the world. And it's a fascinating study. And to something you said, and I'll let you, Antonia, talk about what you said earlier, but I was thinking that you don't have to agree with a book, but I think with something like this, you really have to be engaged with it. It has to engage you in an argument. And I think he does that brilliantly.
I think it's a brilliant book. I read it and I had him on the podcast. Go back and listen to that episode if you can. It's a really good one. He is fascinating. The book is a result of years of research and thinking about this stuff. And one of the arguments he's trying to unravel is, why is it that at the beginning of the 1970s, there are, lots of really left-wing violent terrorists acting in cohort with a kind of secularish, Palestinian-focused Islamic terrorist movement. And then by the end of the decade and into the 80s, the leftist terrorism has largely died a death. And the Islamic terrorism has become, much more violent, much more intent on killing as many people as possible and not secular anymore. And he explores their, the links between the two. And it's absolutely fascinating. And one of the things I adored about it, it's a big, big old book, but there are so many good stories in it. I mean, one of the stories I loved more than anything was when a bunch of left-wing kind of student wannabe terrorists go and train in a kind of in the jihadi camps in the Middle East, and they just really piss off all the jihadis because they're wearing really tight, skin tight flares, and they want to get pissed and have sex with each other. And the jihadists are like, "What are you doing? This is not revolution. Revolution is dedication," and blah blah blah. So it brings out all of those. His account of things like, so he has lots of set piece descriptions of some of the major terrorism events, like, for example, Munich Olympic. So it's a fantastic book. I mean, I don't entirely agree with all his conclusions. He concludes that more state-led left-wing politics would have solved a lot of this. And I thought, maybe that's just, I'm Team Kemi, so I'm not sure I necessarily agreed with that 100%. But everything else in the book I thought was absolutely marvellously done. And I agree, you don't have to agree completely with every single conclusion the book reaches to think it's a brilliant book.
There was a book, it must have been about 15 years ago or maybe longer, by Francis Wheen that covered some of this. And at the nub of it is the absurdism of it. So, does this book give you a healthy license to laugh at terrorists?
Yeah, it does. I mean, you laugh at those, the kids in their skin tight flares.
I think this is just an absolutely fascinating account. And I just found myself, when I say about engaging, is, that you'd start engaging with this story. You start thinking, well, I don't see it entirely that way, but actually I do see where you're coming from. And I do like the interpretation. I do see that you've spent the time thinking about this, and there are a lot of things that he's absolutely right about, stupid mistakes that were made, and, chances we had to cut certain things off many years before and didn't.
Yeah, and he really knows the stuff, and he knows the people, and he's done all the interviews and he's done all the work. So actually it's presumptuous of me to disagree sometimes with some of his conclusions, but they're not really his main conclusions anyway. It's just it's a part of his argument at the end.
Yeah, at the end.
And people, should read the book because it's amazing. I really, really recommend it. In fact, we had to fight over which one of us chose it as their non-fiction pick.
We did, and you were very gracious. Thank you.
I was as gracious as my middle name, Paul. What can I say? So, Mark, tell me about your third and final choice.
Oh, goodness. I was enjoying that chat so much I'd forgotten I had another book. So my third book is called Man of Bones. It's by a person called Ben Creed, but he's not actually a person because he's two people who are called Chris Rickaby and Barney Thompson. I think one of them is an advertising executive. I mean, I cannot imagine how two people can sit down and write a book. I know there are people who do it, but it's beyond my ken. But whatever it is, these two have done a very good job. I always like books about Cold War Russia or Stalinist Russia, or indeed 19th century Russia, because we were chatting to Roger Morris yesterday, and I liked his books very much, which are sort of set in the 19th century. But in any event, I mean, I like Martin Cruz Smith, who sadly just died. He's got great books, and I like William Ryan, and there's many others set in and around Stalinist Russia. This one is set in 1953. Its protagonist is a Leningrad militiaman. With his name is Rossel. He discovers two bodies are discovered by the Finland station. Looks like they've been run over by a hit-and-run driver. And Rossel's background is that he's just come out of a Stalinist labor camp. He's had a bad time, but he's reinstated. And he has a sidekick, as everyone has a sidekick. This is a pure crime book. It's not really, I can't really think there's any spy element to it, really.
No, not really, no.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been investigated when he winds up in the labor camp. He's been investigated by the officer who's actually, then again, when he comes out of the labor camp, working with, but they're on
he's
crimes.
fallen foul of the security services in the previous. I should say this is the third in a series, and I've not read the first two, and I thought that doesn't matter. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Anyway, these bodies are discovered. I don't think it's breaking too much of the story to say that they actually were murdered. The story that unfolds takes Rossel on a roller coaster chasing for the murderer. He ends up goes to Georgia. More importantly, he is dragged into the history of the Bolshevik Revolution and goes all the way back. There's a story in that way back when Bolshevik Revolution, which is actually quite stunningly brilliant, and it ends up he ends up pretty close to the top echelons. I'll say just pretty close, without saying any more, to the top echelons of the Russian government, who are behind this whole stuff that's been going on. It's absolutely gripping and a wonderfully atmospheric thriller. I read it when I was a judge in the Historical Writers Association Gold Crown. It did not win. A very good book did win, but it was certainly could have won, and I loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really enjoyable series. I have read the two earlier books as well as this one. And he's got a great character who has his fingers cut off as part of his interrogation before he winds up being sent to Siberia, which is, one of the cruelest things you can imagine. The man is a musician, so, this is really a cruel thing. But he creates great characters. They create great characters.
Yeah.
And what you have here is just a thrilling, page-turning read.
And the atmosphere, the Stalinist Russia atmosphere is brilliantly conjured up.
It is, yeah. It's that thing Antonia was saying earlier about wearing your history lightly, so that you've got a lot of detail in there, but it comes out as part of the story naturally. And
he digs up some interesting facts, again, without in your face. So again, 1953, I think all historians of Stalin will know that was actually the year in which Stalin died. Interesting fact, number one, is that Prokofiev's funeral was on the same day as Stalin's, which I never knew. And not many people went to Prokofiev's funeral because obviously they were all rushing to Stalin's funeral.
They were all Russian to Stalin's funeral. But in terms of the mechanics, I'm not a fan of the sort of double author book. It does sort of put me off in a sense, and it's one of my many unhealthy prejudices. But could you see where the joins are? You sense that, or
no? I could not see where the joins were. It's very well written, and I don't know what happens. Do they write a chapter and then another chapter or something? How they do it, I have no idea.
Well, the main thing is it works.
Yeah, and it's seamless.
I have interviewed them both, and it may have been for the first novel. It's interesting how they actually got together, I think, was just as two writers in a writers group, and then started sending pieces back and forth, and suddenly it develops into a project that they got moving. Because he's a musician, this is where it interests the musician. Chris Rickaby, who's the other writer, was more interested in the story of Russia at the time. So they both had brought these interests to it. And I think they did work sort of chapter by chapter, and that's based on my memory now, some years ago. But I think what they do is then they work with each other on making the tone
Yeah, the joint
across the
edit
novel.
or something, yeah. So it was
You
the
know,
musician who discovered that Prokofiev died on the
I'm
day of
pretty
same
sure
day
that's
as
where it
Stalin.
would come from. Yeah.
That one sounds great. I might put that on my to read list because I'm all about Soviet history. My last book,
You've got your fingers in a lot of pies.
I wear so many hats, so many pies.
At least you got fingers.
At least I've got fingers. At least, yeah, like Mr. Russell, and talking about Soviet stuff, at least I've got pies. So, I'm winning. So my last book is also non-fiction. It's The Spy in the Archives by Gordon Carrera. It is the story of Vasily Mitrokhin, the KGB archivist who defected to the West and had meticulously and over a number of years squirreled away all of the deepest secrets of the KGB archives. This is just such an amazingly interesting book for lots and lots of reasons. So one reason is that obviously for a short time, the KGB archives were kind of half open. They were letting people in, but they've completely shut down again now. So our glimpses into the workings of one of the most significant and important organizations in 20th century history, we had a small window and it shut, and we don't have many opportunities to peer inside. And the stuff that Vasily Mitrokhin smuggled out is so important. And the story itself is absolutely fascinating. He sort of, he shuffles his way into an embassy and he says, I've got all this stuff, and they think he's a tramp. And, there's all sorts of brilliant detail. And what I think is amazing about this book, it's twofold. What I think is amazing about this book is that Gordon Carrera manages to give us a flavour of quite how important the Mitrokhin archives are. But he also manages to basically turn a story about a librarian, an archivist, into something, heart-pumpingly exciting. I mean, it's just an incredibly written book. I think it's a masterclass for all writers of non-fiction in this field, to be honest. Paul, you must have read it. You've read everything, Paul. You're like a machine.
I have read it, and it is, funnily enough, a fascinating story. You're right. It's those amazing moments of history that suddenly come out. Because at the same time, if you think when the Stasi archives were opened up, people did go in and grab as much as they could. But of course, they tried to destroy as much stuff as they could at the time. And by the way, the MI6 archives aren't open either. So we're pretty guarded about our stuff. But this insight into Russia is just remarkable. And for have somebody to do this, and as you say, turn up at the embassy and offer the material and everybody thinks, what's this nutter doing? Where did he come from? It's just a truly remarkable story.
So what happens is they move the, and its predecessor archives from the Lubyanka to a kind of compound outside Moscow. And in the process, he's basically in charge of it. He's in charge of all of their archives. So he reads the files, then he goes home at night, basically, and he meticulously writes everything out by hand. And this is one of the reasons why when he turned up at the sort of Western, to Western intelligence with these handwritten notes, they were very skeptical because they were like, well, you could be a fantasist. Like, how do we know? So the story of how they kind of verify, it's just fascinating how they kind of decide that he's kosher, and it and it becomes a trove. I mean, it's still full of stuff that has been underexplored by historians. I mean, it makes me want to learn Russian so that I can go and just live in his archive and just read all the stories, because he explored a lot of it with the famous intelligence historian Christopher Andrew. So that relationship is in the book, and the character of Mitrokhin comes out quite strongly in the book as well. He's quite cantankerous, he's quite difficult, he's awkward to work with, and his relationship with Christopher Andrew is not always the easiest one. So yeah, fascinating stuff.
He was a Soviet Marxist, still one of the most right-wing librarians we have.
So I'm interested, you say, Paul, that the British Security Archive is not open.
Yeah,
I thought someone actually who was a friend of mine in university way back when, wrote the official Keith Jeffrey.
Yeah, right. Well, what happened there was Keith Jeffrey was given the access. He was allowed to write that book, which is a wonderful, gigantic book about MI6, but then they closed the window again, so that's what's happened.
Yeah, but it's also, because it's an official history, it's really deeply unsatisfying to those of us who whose job is to use archives to write books, because Keith Jeffrey did a fantastic job. I'm not having a go at him, but he writes MI6 did this in this period, but he doesn't document anything. There's no, you can't yourself go and look at the archives from which he drew his conclusion.
So it's edited. I mean, you're looking through a particular perspective.
It's official.
It's official. So A, he's seeing what they want them to see. B, he's writing a history, so that's necessarily interpretative. It's not a list of facts.
Yes.
It's an interpretative history, which is absolutely reasonable, and I have no reason to doubt him, and he's a wonderful historian. And these same objections, by the way, go for the GCHQ one and the MI5 one. It's just so frustrating. There's one particular operation that he talks about in his book that I'm quite interested in maybe writing a book on. But all I have is his take. I can't look at the original papers. And the original papers, there'll be reams of them. He's condensed this operation to 2 pages of his book because the book's like massive, but he's got a lot to write about. Behind those 2 pages of his book are files and files and files that nobody else is allowed to look at. No other historians are allowed to look at. It's so unsatisfying.
It even relates to things. I think I was looking at something the other day and it was to do with the First World War. And we have that account of what was going on, but that's all we have. And there's no way of backing it up or finding out what's behind that, So you get a couple of pages on a story with a couple of characters mentioned. I would like to know more about and what their role was during the First World War.
I'd just like to say you can't go directly to Keith Jeffrey because sadly he's no longer with us.
That is also sad because he's a wonderful historian. But I mean, just as a sort of illustrative thought for why this is all so stupid is I've obviously written a book about the Cambridge 5 spying. It's coming out next April. Hurrah. So, for example, we know about Kim Philby betraying these certain operations, including this Ukrainian one. And I went to the CIA archives and I could piece together the British operation because in the CIA archives, they had all the letters and briefings that they'd had from the British about these failed operations that Philby had betrayed. Right. So you can find it by going to the CIA archives, but you can't get it from ours.
And the CIA archives are open.
Yeah, what the CIA...
Much of them.
Yeah, one of the things that the CIA did was to release so much material that you'd have to be really clever to find exactly what you want in the middle of it, But they put a lot of stuff out there, millions and millions of pages of stuff.
Yeah.
So you really have to.
Lots of it digitized, lots of it searchable. I mean, my goodness,
but
we could learn a thing.
At least it's there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, gosh, you've got me on my absolute hobby horse. So I think I should climb down. Come on. And say thank you very much. That's been amazing. It's been a great reading year, and I've really enjoyed talking to you all about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonia, and everyone. I really enjoyed it too, and the wine was quite nice as well.
Happy Christmas.
Wow, that was from the Grinch, so we really must have been having a good time.
It wasn't from the heart.